The room was filled with laughter, pastel balloons drifting above gift-wrapped teddy bears and cupcake towers, until my husband stood up, clinked his glass, and handed me divorce papers in front of everyone. No warning, no explanation, just cold eyes and legal ink on the happiest day of my life. My heart pounded as I stood frozen, surrounded by stunned gasps and eyes that didn't know where to look. But what he didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this moment far longer than he had. What happened next will shock even those who thought they'd seen everything. But first, let's go back to the beginning. The lights in the banquet hall glimmered softly off the silver streamers, casting dappled reflections across the ceiling like quiet waves on still water. Laughter and light music had filled the room just minutes before, and every guest wore that fragile, curated joy that comes with celebrating new life. I had spent weeks perfecting every detail of the day, the seating chart, the color scheme, the menu. It wasn't just a party. It was a statement of hope, a kind of fragile reassurance that even with Liam's growing aloofness, we were still a family, or at least pretending to be one. I remember the feeling when he stood up. I wasn't looking at him at first. I was still tracing my fingers over the softness of the socks someone had gifted me, imagining our daughter's feet in them. Then came the glass clink. Polite smiles turned toward him. I did too, expecting him to offer the obligatory speech, something sweet and awkward, perhaps even forced, but necessary. A toast to our journey, our daughter, maybe even to us. Instead, he pulled a folder from inside his blazer. The gesture was clean, practiced, premeditated. "Amy, these are your divorce papers. You've been served." I didn't breathe for at least 5 seconds. The room reacted before I did. A collective gasp escaped like the air sucked from a single pair of lungs. Then came the silence, dense and strangling, the kind that makes people shift in their chairs and avert their eyes, unsure whether to flee or console. I stared at him, not because I didn't believe it, but because I did. Instantly. On some level, I had been bracing for the fall. It was the how that rattled me, that he would weaponize this moment in front of my friends, my sister, my aging parents, in front of his parents. A moment I had hoped would anchor me emotionally in a season of uncertainty had just been detonated. Liam didn't flinch. His face was carved in control, lips tight, chin proud. His eyes swept the room quickly, as though scanning for admiration, for confirmation that he had done something bold. I realized then that this wasn't a moment of weakness for him. This was the finale of a plan he had rehearsed. But the applause he seemed to expect never came. Instead, the baby kicked hard inside me, like a warning, like instinct awakening. And in that moment, something icy settled into my spine, straightening my back as I calmly took the folder from his hands. He thought he had taken the floor from under me, but he had only triggered the trap I'd already laid. The air outside the baby shower was cold, not by temperature but by contrast, so starkly different from the room I had just left, thick with the sour stench of humiliation and faux sympathy. The moment the door shut behind me, the weight in my chest didn't lift. It sharpened. I walked to the car slowly, my heels deliberately echoing across the pavement, the delicate tissue paper pom-poms still visible through the windows behind me. My mother-in-law, Janice, hurried after me, her face creased with concern. But there was something else there too. Doubt, as if she was trying to gauge whether I had deserved it. I turned to her with a smile, not brittle, not forced, just perfectly practiced. "It's going to be all right." It was more than a reassurance. It was a warning. Because Janice, for all her motherly devotion to Liam, had no idea what had been set in motion weeks before. She didn't know that the day I found that hotel receipt, folded twice, tucked into the side pocket of his gym bag like it was an old candy wrapper, I hadn't cried. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't even confronted him. I had called my old law school colleague, Eric Zimmerman, now a private investigator with a specialty in high-stakes infidelity and financial fraud, and I got to work. Melissa. The name itself carried a kind of juvenile sting, the way it slithered off the investigator's tongue. He had found her within 72 hours. Her voice echoed in my mind from the Christmas party, high-pitched, slightly nasal, over-enunciated. She had lingered too long by Liam's side that night. I remembered the laugh, sharp and flirty, and the way Liam had casually brushed imaginary lint from her shoulder. She was 25, a receptionist in Liam's firm, and utterly unaware of the kind of man she was betting her future on. But the affair was the distraction, a well-placed decoy to what really mattered: the finances. Eric's second report hit like a gavel, a joint offshore account, untouched by our accountant. The trail was subtle, but not invisible. I traced Liam's steps through fraudulent wire transfers, learned how he'd forged my signature, clumsily, arrogantly. A theft of trust and capital, from the company we'd built together, brick by brick, client by client, from late nights and sacrifice and belief. At the shower, Liam wore victory on his face like cologne, but I already had my war chest, exhibits, notarized statements, time-stamped records, enough to reduce his smirk to a grimace in open court. And yet, all that wasn't the strike. It was merely the silence before it. The courier's knock was as precise as the plan it delivered. 8:07 a.m., sharp. That envelope, manila and unassuming, carried the full weight of every quiet betrayal, every smug smile Liam had worn like armor, every ounce of calculated cruelty he thought he could hurl at me without consequence. He would have taken it casually, no doubt, bathrobe on, coffee in hand, perhaps with Melissa still asleep upstairs, wrapped in the borrowed warmth of my life. He probably thought it was from his attorney. Or worse, a late wedding invitation he forgot to RSVP to. He wouldn't have expected it. That was the point. A predator never anticipates being hunted. Inside, a dossier composed with surgical precision. The first page bore his name in bold, followed by a list of charges that stripped the gloss off his reputation: fraud, embezzlement, adultery. Each accusation came with receipts, actual ones, wire transfer records with forged authorization, surveillance stills of his too familiar hand slipping the documents into a banker's briefcase, affidavits from bank clerks and administrative assistants, a time-stamped email thread he thought he'd deleted. But the crescendo, the note designed to crush, was a single sheet near the end, a paternity report. 0% probability of relation. I hadn't added commentary, no margin notes, just the science. Let him read between the lines. Liam had always insisted he didn't need to be tested, said it was unnecessary, that he'd been checked years ago. But when our efforts to conceive stretched into the silence of failed months, I insisted. And when the results came back, confirming his infertility, he begged me to keep it private. He said it would emasculate him, that he couldn't bear the shame. And I had agreed. I honored that secrecy, even when I shouldn't have, back when I still believed secrecy was mercy. Our daughter was conceived through IVF, a donor screened not just for health but for integrity. A donor I chose not just as a mother, but as a woman who refused to let Liam's genetic pride override my future child's dignity. Also in the envelope, a cease and desist order. No contact, no more manipulation cloaked in fatherhood. Legal walls, high and unscalable. I filed for full custody, restitution, and criminal charges. He called me 27 times. I didn't answer. When he came to my mother's house, hoping to reclaim even a sliver of control, she met him at the door with a second envelope. This one was even thinner than the first. It only needed one page to ruin him. Effective immediately. his removal from the board. No title, no power, no legacy, only silence. In the days that followed the delivery of those 2 envelopes, the collapse of Liam's carefully curated life was not so much a spectacle as it was an erosion. Measured, clinical, and utterly inescapable. It didn't fall in flames. It rotted from within. The headlines came swiftly, each one peeling away another layer of his illusion. Tech startup rocked by scandal. CEO's wife exposes financial misconduct. Infidelity, fraud, and a baby. Melissa vanished first. Predictably, she had no appetite for public disgrace, especially not the kind that came with subpoenas and invasive questions from journalists camped outside Liam's condo. Her silence was immediate, her departure surgical. She didn't even bother to collect the toothbrush she had left in his drawer. His circle of friends, those golf buddies, drinking companions, and business partners who once chuckled at his jokes and nodded through his lies, began to scatter, like rats disembarking a sinking ship. Loyalty evaporated the moment it became costly. Some went radio silent, others made thinly veiled statements distancing themselves. Not one of them called to check on him. They were never really his friends, just satellites orbiting what they thought was a rising star. Meanwhile, our company, once equally ours but built on my vision and sweat, released a statement under my name. Moving forward with integrity, we renew our commitment to ethical leadership and transparency. It was subtle but loaded, every word chosen to undo the myth of Liam's competence. The media did the rest. Pregnant CEO outsmarts cheating husband became a rallying cry. It wasn't just gossip. It was a narrative that resonated. Intelligence over arrogance, dignity over cruelty. The public didn't just sympathize, they admired. Liam lost everything. His executive status, his social standing, his influence, and any illusions he had about parental rights were buried in a courtroom where he couldn't explain away forged documents and stolen funds. The judge's gavel didn't just finalize custody, it crystallized the truth. He was a man who thought domination was love and betrayal was power. 3 months later, I gave birth to a daughter. I named her Grace, not as an homage to serenity, but as a nod to what it took to endure in silence while the world caught up to the truth I'd carried alone. When the final ruling was announced, sole custody, full ownership, no appeals, I didn't gloat. I didn't cheer. I simply drove home, buckled Grace into her bassinet, and stood by the window as the evening sun turned the sky a soft, victorious gold. Because some wars are won without raising your voice, and some justice arrives not in a courtroom, but in the quiet click of a mailbox lid.